Hoxie with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the changing nature of heroes and the sort of heroes, it could be fictional or otherwise, James Bond or whatever, that we had as a kid and how we identified with them. And some of this will be dependent on the era that we grew up, whether you were a child from the 1980s or the 1990s or whatever. And who were the heroes around at the time. Superman, for example, the cartoon character or later a TV show had quite a long run. Its sort of relevance was spanning like 40 or 50 years, I think, from the time those two young Jewish guys produced it, or created it or thought of it. But just looking at the sort of characters and what they stood for is interesting, because that's changed over time, and how kids identify with characters, and some of it reflecting their home life. If you look at, say, a kid who's where the parents are both working very long hours, then their heroes may all completely exist in a world of fantasy, because they've got no sort of real adult role models sort of around them. Others who, say, come from a divorced household may have heroes that are unusual amount of male heroes, that because they haven't got a father figure around. So there's different things that can affect kids, or even as you go into adulthood, I suppose. But and I think the heroes probably represent the need, or some of the needs that the people have at a certain time. The people that want a world of affirmative action, for example, socialist, Marxist affirmative action, they may worship black lesbian activists, street placard waving activists, because that most represents their immediate or current need. Whether they would still identify those people as a hero 10 years down the track, that's another matter. And I've noticed that the characters, which were a mix of real life and fictional, the characters that I believed were relevant to me as a kid, I don't necessarily see the same thing as an adult. And I can look back with sort of quaint bemusement at, did I really think that was a hero? So whether because it's beyond, it transcends fantasy, like, James Bond, for example. So when I look back at the sort of characters that I thought were important, what did those characters stand for? Well, they were fighting the bad guys. And now that's probably something universal. And the need to invent a bogeyman bad guy has always existed throughout history, whether it's in ancient Greece or ancient Rome or at any other time. There's always those bad guys down the road, and we got to get them and stick it up them and that sort of thing. And that unifies and binds people behind the demagogue, as it were. And a lot of people probably heard of the term a philippic. Which is to denounce a speech that is full of denunciation, a philippic. Now, that was something that came from ancient Greece when Philip of Macedon, or Macedon, was on the rise. This is Philip of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great. When Macedon was on the rise, there was an Athenian politician called Demosthenes, not the Demosthenes from the Peloponnesian War, but later on. And he was made a number of fiery speeches about Philip of Macedon, saying that if this guy achieves his objectives of centralizing power up in northern Macedon, then the whole of Greece will come under his control, which of course did happen. And so Demosthenes was warning about this, and his speeches were full of firebrand, fiery oratory, and so on, and probably a bit over the top, really. But the point he was making was true, and what he forecasted did in fact happen. So he was quite prescient in his assessment of the politics of the day in Greece, but ancient Greece, of course. So we're talking, 350 BC or somewhere around there. Now, he was an interesting guy, Demosthenes, because he had a speech impediment. He had like a really, really bad lisp. And so the story was that he used to put pebbles in his mouth to keep his tongue in it, prevent his tongue from from pronouncing the lisp, and then would jog up and down a hill reciting poetry with the pebbles in his mouth. I don't know how true that was, but it's if indeed that was the case, and he overcame his speech impediments to deliver these speeches, then you've got to admire his dedication, if anything. But coming back to this idea of heroes, now I don't know how many people. This show was developed before I was, I think, before I was even born, and so I was watching like the reruns of the reruns. It was a show called Danger Man, and I think it was a British production. Yeah, it was. It was a British production originally, and it was sort of like a set in, like he was part of British Secret Service and that sort of thing, and yeah, he was out to stop the bad guys, and he was the number one troubleshooter. You know, he was the danger man, and so if the bad guys were getting on top of things or wherever, then he would be sent to fix it up, and you knew things were really serious if they sent him. Like, ooh. So and naturally, every time he sorted out the bad guys and made sure that they got their asses kicked and the good guys won. And sometimes it was a close run thing, but the good prevailed. But he was a good guy. And if if it came to breaking the rules, if the bad guys were bad enough and they were breaking the rules, then hey, it was a bit of laddie, but otherwise he was a good guy. Good guys don't break rules; they follow the rules. The bad guys have to break the rules because what they're doing is bad. The only way they can succeed is by breaking the rules. So I looked at this Danger Man as a kid. I think probably quite young. 6, 7, 8 years old, somewhere around there. I looked at this Danger Man. Wow, I'd like to be like Danger Man. And there was the glamour of he was always going to exotic, supposedly always going to exotic, foreign locations, and he was flying in these jet plane things, and like, wow. I mean, I wouldn't mind being the guy who was doing that. But and I suppose an element of James Bond, and when you're a kid, and bear in mind the movies have been around for a while when I first started seeing them, but James Bond's the head goon says, and take Bond away, and if he moves, kill him. And I'm, oh no, what's going to happen to James Bond? Oh, and you'd sort of breathe a sigh of relief when, in the end, James Bond would prevail, and he'd be safe, and he'd get the girl and all the other stuff. But the heroes varied, and I remember as a kid seeing. This would have been, I don't know, probably late 60s, early 70s, seeing John Kennedy's Bear Any Burden, Oppose Any Foe speech, which I thought, and that's still today if you listen to it actually, but I thought it was very uplifting because, we can all sleep safe in our beds tonight because this guy's on the case. And if those bad guys, so much as show their faces, they're going to get seriously slapped around. All this type of thing. And it gave one a sense of, as a kid at least, a sense of security. The good things were being done, and that the bad guys would not, the good guys wouldn't allow the bad guys to do the bad things. And that was comforting. Now, whether the good guys really were the good guys, whether the bad guys really were the bad guys, or you had to look at something on a case-by-case basis, and in international real politic and that sort of, as a kid, you don't have that sort of sophistication, nor do many adults for that matter. And I can look back on some of the big instances that I remember as a kid, either hearing about, some of the excuses for escalating the Vietnam War. I wouldn't have dreamed that the Western government would manufacture and lie and spread propaganda about something just so they could find justification for escalating the war, because they believed that if you look at the rationale for fighting communism, the domino theory, again, which started before I was even born, but that I sort of looked at later. It was still a prevalent thought that the communists were trying to spread revolution throughout these poor countries of Southeast Asia, for example, like Vietnam. They were trying to spread that. That was true. Whether or not the domino theory was relevant, that you could debate. I don't think it was. But if you look at the American counter moves at the time, dressed up as fighting against bad, they were misunderstanding and misinterpreting things. That they could have succeeded much more if they prepared to take a more nuanced view of things rather than going straight to war or try and subvert elected governments or things like that, or arm and fund guerrilla activists. All that. I don't now, as an adult, look back and say, well, I don't think that was really very sensible. I think that they could have approached it in a different way. Not that armed conflict is totally out of place in all circumstances. No, it does have its place, but as part of a range of measures to try and get outcomes. So some of the people I thought were heroes back then, some general would get up and say, we're doing this and we're doing that. I go, wow, what a role model. As I get older, I don't see those people. I look back now and I say, well, that guy's actually a bit of an idiot. Well, that guy's just parroting a speech that was given to him by some bullshit speechwriter. And you can see that as you get older, but as a kid, you can't. So that the type of heroes change. Now, I've noticed that a lot of people today, particularly young people, are staying children for much longer than certainly my generation did. So even in their mid-30s, even in their 40s, some of them are still children. There are people who are in their 50s and 60s who I know that because they've never had to take responsibility for their own lives, they talk as children, think as children, and have ideological attitudes that are really fixed because only children can afford that sort of strictly black and white perception of the universe. People have had to take responsibility for their lives, and particularly for the lives of others. They can't afford to be that rigid. They have to be more nuanced, and that means they have to consider the relevance of, is this person really a hero? Is that character really a hero? Now, coming to the fictional superheroes now, like the Supermans and so on, there was a shitload of those when I was a kid. Again, the cartoons that would have been done in the 1950s and 60s. So I was watching the reruns of the reruns, but there was the Supermans and I don't know what else, Green Lantern, Aquaman, Batman. There was a shitload of them, and also not just cartoons but also TV shows. Like it was reruns of some 1960s Batman TV show, which was kind of very tongue-in-cheek in the way it was put together. But looking at these heroes, I didn't really identify with any of those superheroes as a kid. I'd think, well, gee, that heat ray vision that Superman can do, that would be handy sometimes. Sure saved me having to boil the kettle. So there were things like that, but I don't recall really identifying with it. I wish I had the strength of Superman so I could beat the crap out of so and so. And there were, certainly some of the schools I went to, there were goons and bullies and thugs, and that, they seemed to be an inevitable sort of byproduct of putting a lot of people into one place. But I don't ever recall thinking, I wish I was Superman or something. I don't ever really think about that. I can't. I look at, say, Captain Kirk in Star Trek. I remember the first episode of Star Trek I saw, and you look at things like, well, I wish I was that confident. I wish people would just do what I said, like they do what he. I wish I had his knowledge, but you don't see as a kid that may have taken many years of training and high levels of intellect and so on and so forth to reach a level. And when I think of one episode of Star Trek, I think going off the top of my head here, he said he was 35 years old, which for that to be a starship captain is probably quite young in the overall scheme of things. And I remember thinking, gee, well, I hope when I'm 35, I'm starship captain. As a kid, I remember sort of thinking those things. So there were those elements of that, but otherwise there wasn't much. There weren't heroes that I looked at and I'd say there were certain aspects of it. Well, I wouldn't mind that part of them, or this part of them. I wouldn't mind that, or gee whiz, I wouldn't mind their knowledge of this or capability in that area. But I didn't see it as anything universal. No, I don't know. Today, heroes are really anti-heroes in the sense of we're fighting fascist Nazis that are everywhere. Now, it's particularly the Jewish propaganda machine that pushes the idea of Nazis are everywhere. And so you can't discount their involvement in that overall globalist narrative today. But I'm surprised at the amount of people in diversity departments, human resource departments, and so on, that I might come across frequently, who believe that they've done something wonderful and good if they only stop straight white Christian males. Well, you don't have to be Christian, straight white males from getting the job or getting the promotion, or if they can accuse them falsely or otherwise of being, Nazis or Hitler. They believe they're doing good things by doing, they're out there looking for Nazis because they're everywhere. How do they know they're everywhere? Well, the media says it. Joe Biden says it, and so they must be everywhere. And this sort of thing. So, and heroes are people who say, well, all the illiterate peasants of the third world can come to the first world, and that's a good thing. If you're against it, you are Hitler. And so the idea of identifying with people, so the people that are most vocal in destroying Western society and declaring it all as evil and all the laws are illegitimate and all straight white males are Nazis, the people who are most active in doing that have become now the heroes of this younger generation. So, and I mentioned this in a couple of videos ago, where school children have no white hero. White school children in white Western countries have no white heroes. All their heroes are black and brown. And this is causing and is part of a huge social engineering revolution forced from the top down. It's not ground up, which is radically altering our society and turning it into a basket case situation. And it comes back to the heroes we revere. When I was a kid, were the ones that were fighting back against bad, were supporting freedom and democracy and the vote, all this sort of stuff, the rule of law and due legal process, were supporting all that. And certainly in senior high school, I came away with the view that the rule of law and due legal process were actually very important. And it's something that sort of it's modified a bit, but stayed with me from that. But I don't see those sort of values. The values that the heroes brought today are Nazis are everywhere. Let's get them. How do we know they're Nazis? Well, they misgendered a trans person. That means they're fucking Hitler, and we have to stop them and get them. And so those are the type of people that are being now given hero status, and that a lot of young people want to emulate. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.